Tonight, we're leaving the kings alone. No royal court. No temple ceremony. No battle in the desert. No great monument rising against the sky. We're going somewhere smaller. An Egyptian village by the Nile. An ordinary afternoon. So ordinary, in fact, that no one living through it would have thought it worth recording. No scribe would stop to note this hour. Not the sunlight on the mud brick walls. Not the quiet scraping of grain being ground. Not the brief relief of a breeze drifting in from the river. And yet, this is where most of life was lived. So get comfortable. You do not need names tonight. You do not need dates. You do not need dynasties or pharaohs or timelines. You only need to follow the shape of a slow afternoon. It is well past midday now. The busy part of the morning is over. First work of the day has already been done. The sun is still high, but it no longer has the freshness of morning. The light feels heavier now, whiter. Still, it lies across the village without much movement. Across roofs, across walls, across baskets, jars, mats, and tools left near doorways. The houses are made of mud brick, plain walls, earth-colored, sun-dried. Some walls are smoother than others. Some have been patched. Some show rounded wear at the corners where hands, baskets, shoulders, and passing animals have brushed against them again and again. A doorway holds a little pool of shade. A threshold has been polished by bare feet. A low wall has become the natural place to set down a jar for a moment before lifting it again. Nothing here is built to impress. Everything is built to be used. At this hour, the village has slowed, not stopped. Villages do not really stop, but the pace has changed. Work folds itself into narrower spaces, into cooler corners, into doorways where a little air still moves. Near one entrance, a woman sits with a basket in her lap. One side has come loose. She bends one strand back into place, threads another through, tightens it, turns the basket, and begins again. She is not working quickly. There is no reason to. The basket will be finished. If not now, then later. The afternoon is long enough to allow small tasks to take their time. From a shaded room nearby comes the sound of grain being ground. Stone against stone. A low, dry scraping sound. Steady. Patient. Grain shifts. Stone moves. A little more flour gathers. And then the sound begins again. If you stayed here long enough, that sound would stop feeling like an event. It would simply become part of the air. A child appears in the doorway. He stands at the border between shade and sunlight, not quite wanting to help, not quite wanting to be sent away. A quiet voice speaks from inside. The child answers. The answer sounds mildly disappointed, but not surprised. Then he turns and wanders back into the lane. Outside, the ground is warm and dusty. A dog has claimed one narrow strip of shade beside a wall. It lies there with complete seriousness. One ear flicks. One eye opens. Then closes again. A few chickens move through the dust. Peck once. Pause. Take 2 steps. Peck again. Even they seem to understand that this is not the hour for unnecessary effort. From farther off comes a breeze from the Nile. Not enough to change the day. Only enough to be noticed. A hanging cloth lifts. A reed mat stirs at one corner. Someone sitting in a doorway raises their head for a moment and lets the breeze pass over the face before it slips away. The river is not visible from every room, but its presence is everywhere. In the wet smell that sometimes arrives with the wind, in the jars standing against walls, in the damp mark on a shoulder where water has been carried, in the reeds near the bank, in the tide boats waiting by the shore. Even when you cannot see the Nile, the whole village is arranged around the fact of it. Someone tips water from a large clay jar into a smaller vessel. The sound is round and cool. Water striking pottery. The jar is heavy, so it is lowered with care. Nothing is wasted. Not effort. Not water. Not the coolness that lingers on the outside of the clay for a short while afterward. And somewhere nearby, another scent has begun to gather. At first, it is faint, warm, almost sweet. Then it grows richer, more certain, more familiar. Bread, not lifted from the oven yet, not cool enough to handle, not ready to be carried across the lane to another household. Just bread in that in-between stage, still finishing itself in heat and clay and waiting. You can imagine the dough prepared earlier, before the day became too hot. Flour worked with water, a little salt, perhaps a bit of starter saved from before. No written recipe. No need for one. This is knowledge held in hands, in memory, in repetition. On one of the flat roofs, flax fibers have been spread out. Some are drying. Some are being sorted. Some have already begun to look less like plant and more like the beginning of linen. A person crouches there with a bundle beside them. One section is pulled straight. Another is laid aside. Another is checked and worked again. From the roof, the village looks softer. One roof after another. A mat left out in the light. A jar near a low parapet. A neighbor shaking out a cloth. Another pausing for a moment, doing nothing obvious at all, perhaps simply because the breeze is better up here. Below, in a dimmer room, someone twists fiber into thread. Pull. Turn. Smooth. Pull. Turn. Smooth. It is patient work. The sort of work that asks for attention, but not strain. The hands already know what to do. The body has learned the sequence. The thread lengthens a little at a time. Small progress. Real progress. That may be one of the quietest differences between their world and ours. So much of life here is visible. A cracked basket can be repaired or it cannot. Grain becomes flour. Fiber becomes thread. Dough becomes bread. Water carried from the river is either in the jar or it is not. The work is slow, but it is legible. By evening, you can often see exactly what your hands have done. At the edge of another house, an older man sits with a staff beside him. He does not look busy. That is not the same thing as doing nothing. He watches the lane. A child sent on an errand. A woman carrying a bowl out and bringing it back fuller. A goat wandering too close to where it should not be. A jar placed carefully in a patch of shade. He has likely seen thousands of afternoons like this. Dusty ones. Windy ones. Slightly cooler ones. Afternoons that felt endless while they were happening and ordinary once they were gone. Beyond the last houses, the fields are quieter now than they were in the morning. A hoe may be leaning against a wall. A basket may be resting beside a channel. The irrigation ditches catch pieces of light and throw them back in thin, bright lines. Nothing there is forgotten. It is simply waiting for the better hour. The hour when the light softens. The hour when the body can move more willingly again. People here would not have described themselves as holding ancient agricultural wisdom. They would have said, if they said anything at all, that some tasks are done now and some later. That the river rises when it rises. That the soil behaves one way when wet and another when dry. That seeds cannot be argued with. That the weather keeps its own timing. Knowledge often sounds simple when it has been fully absorbed. Down by the bank, boats rest against the shore. A rope knocks lightly against wood. Slow. Irregular. Reeds bend. Recover. A man may be checking a knot. Or perhaps he checked it some time ago and is simply standing there for a minute, 1 foot in the shade, looking out over the water before returning to whatever comes next. The river moves with complete indifference to the pace of the village. Older than the houses. Older than the baskets. Older than the concerns of anyone living this one small day. And still, every part of the village depends on it. Back in the lane, two children crouch beside a wall where the shade has widened enough to be useful. One draws a line through the dust with a stick. The other places pebbles along it in a pattern that matters greatly for 1 minute, and not at all after that. A short disagreement begins, then disappears. One of them finds a curled scrap of reed and stands it upright like a tiny boat. It falls over at once. This is apparently very funny. A pigeon lands on a roof edge with a brief flutter of wings, then settles. Someone shakes out a cloth. Dust catches the sunlight for a second, then thins into the air. A goat noses at a basket. A hand guides it away. From inside one room comes the faint knock of pottery being set down on a hard floor. None of these sounds break the quiet. They are what the quiet is made of. If you had to describe the afternoon in one word, it would not be silence. It would be balance. Stone on grain. Water in clay. A footstep in dust. A bird on a roof. A child speaking and then forgetting what was said. The smell of bread holding its place in the warm air. Everything sits where it belongs. That may be why an ordinary village can feel so restful to imagine. Nothing here is building toward a revelation. Nothing is racing. Nothing is trying to impress us. This hour has no climax hidden inside it. It does not need one. It only needs to keep unfolding the way real afternoons do. A little work, a little waiting, a little shade, a little hunger beginning, a little wind from the river. Now the light begins to change. Not quickly enough for anyone to mention it, but enough. A wall begins to hold more color. A patch of white glare withdraws from the ground. The heat is still there, but it no longer presses with quite the same force. The village has held itself still through the brightest part of the day. Now, slowly, it begins to loosen. More people are moving again. A stool is carried outside. A bundle that has been waiting by a doorway is lifted. Someone straightens a back after sitting too long. Someone else checks the oven again. The smell of bread has deepened. Another household has started thinking about the evening meal in a more practical way now. A jar is opened. Lentils are looked at. Onions are counted. A few herbs are moved from one bowl to another. A cooking place is brushed clear. Not the meal itself yet. Only the small movements that come before the first true motion. There's something very human about this part of the day. The part where hunger has not quite arrived, but dinner is already present in thought. Where work is not over, but it is changing kind. Where the body quietly begins to plan for comfort. Water set ready. A bowl near at hand. Fuel gathered closer. A cloth folded. A child called back toward home. If we were telling the sort of story people usually tell about ancient Egypt, we would leave now and go looking for larger things. A palace. A tomb. A procession. A decree. But most lives were not lived there. Most lives were lived here. In rooms that became too warm by mid-afternoon. In doorways chosen for airflow. In hands that kept mending what could still be mended. In the decision to wait for better light before returning to the fields. That is not the dramatic version of history. It is simply the version that filled most human hours. And maybe that is why it feels gentler. It asks less from us. It does not insist on awe. It only asks that we notice. Notice the polished threshold, the repaired basket, the half-ground grain, the damp mark left by a water jar, the roof where flax is spread, the child drawing a line in the dust, the old man watching the lane without seeming to, the bread still inside the oven. These are small things, but they are not trivial. They are the structure of a day, and days laid one over another are what a life becomes. The shadows are longer now. Still short, perhaps, but longer. The dog gets up at last, turns once, lies down again in a better patch of shade. The pigeon remains where it landed, perfectly committed to doing almost nothing. The children are quieter. The grinding continues somewhere, but less steadily than before. Perhaps the bowl is nearly full. Perhaps the hands doing the work have grown tired. Perhaps that task, too, is almost ready to pause. Another breath of river air moves through the lane. A little cooler now. Or perhaps it only feels cooler because the worst of the heat has passed. Either way, the effect is the same. A shoulder lowers. A face softens. The day no longer feels like something to endure. It feels like something beginning, very slowly, to release its grip. And you can loosen with it. There is nothing left to keep track of. No test at the end. No detail you must remember. The basket can remain half repaired. The grain can sit in its bowl. The bread will be lifted when it is ready. The evening meal will be made whether or not we stay to watch the first flame catch. For now, it is enough to remain here. Mud brick walls storing the warmth of the day. Dust soft under careful feet. A clay jar in the shade. A roof where flax lies drying. A dog asleep again. A child finally called inside. A river moving beyond the fields, beyond the reeds, beyond the houses, patient as ever. This afternoon has not tried to be remarkable. It has only been itself. And because of that, it has become calm. A plain hour in a plain village. Useful work. Small comforts. Measured effort. Nothing more. Nothing less. So let the details blur now. You do not need to see every doorway clearly. You do not need to count the jars. You do not need to follow the children. You do not need to watch the flour gather grain by grain. Let the village soften at the edges. Let the roofs and walls and lanes and reeds and boats drift together into one quiet place. The sun lowers. The heat eases. The shadows stretch. The river goes on moving. And somewhere in an ancient Egyptian village, a slow afternoon passes into evening, as countless others did before it. Not grandly, not loudly, just naturally. You can rest here a little longer, with the warm wall, with the smell of bread, with the low scrape of stone on grain fading in and out, with the faint breath of the Nile in the air, with the sense that the day, after holding itself still for so long, has finally begun to exhale. And while it does, you can do the same. Slowly, quietly, without effort, without needing anything more from the afternoon, without needing anything more from yourself. Rest now. The village will manage the rest of the evening without us. The bread will be lifted. The bowls will be filled. The last light will leave the walls. And the river will keep moving in the dark. You do not need to follow any farther. You can simply let the sound of this old familiar world grow softer and softer until it is only warmth and distance and sleep.